During the Summer War Games, a 3-day training exercise of the Russian fleet in the Barents Sea, 2 consecutive explosions had rocked the ocean. It took a while for the Russians to realize their nuclear-powered cruise missile submarine, the K-141, the Kursk, was missing. After a severely delayed search and rescue mission, the Russian Navy finally found her lying on the sea floor. When the Russians heard knocking that sounded like an SOS, they believed there were survivors, but they were unable to dock their badly maintained submersibles to rescue the crew. Many Russians were angry and disgusted that numerous offers of foreign countries to assist with the rescue of the crew were rejected. But the Navy wouldn't and couldn't let any foreigners anywhere near the highly classified submarine. After all, the reason the Kursk sank in the first place was because a foreign spy submarine had collided with the sub, or so they claimed. After 4 days of trying to get the crew out of the Kursk with defective equipment, the Russians had to admit defeat, and they requested outside help. When Norwegian and British rescuers finally arrived on the scene a week after the accident, they discovered they were too late. The Kursk had gone down with all hands. The press had mercilessly reported about the Navy's incompetence, their constant lies and deception, and they ragged on Russian President Vladimir Vladimirovich Putin for not breaking off his vacation to support the rescue effort in the Barents Sea. It made him look callous and ignorant. Putin knew he'd made a mistake, and he needed to get the situation under control to save his political career and Russia's face. On Tuesday, August 22nd, the day after the rescue operation ended in defeat, family members found a note pinned to the door of the officers' club in Vijayeva. The families could pick up a glass with seawater from the accident site. Before President Putin flew out to meet the families of the lost crewmen at Vijayeva submarine base, he issued a decree. The Russian people would observe an official day of mourning for the crew of the Kursk the following day, on Wednesday, the 23rd of August. Most families had not yet accepted that their loved ones were dead. They were furious at the president for declaring a day of mourning without discussing it with them. The Russian government was burying the men before there was convincing evidence they were dead. The families of the crew working in the forward compartment knew there was no hope for their men. However, other wives remained convinced there were still survivors in the Kursk trapped in one of the adjoining sealed-off compartments. Naval officers at the base tried to explain that only the 9th compartment had an escape hatch. Any survivors would have known to go there. Besides, there was no way to get into or out of any other compartment. But there had been so many lies. Why should the families believe anyone now? The wives felt that the Navy just wanted the crisis to end. Survivors be damned. All ceremonies should be postponed until the bodies were recovered. Putin agreed to cancel all mourning ceremonies at Vijayeva, including a church service, and he would not fly out to the wreck site to lay a wreath on the Barents Sea to honor the dead. People felt it would be a photo op for the president, and then he would disappear, never to be seen again. For the first time ever, a Russian official had stopped the ceremony because of public pressure. The president flew out to the Kola Peninsula to begin his 3-step program to reassert his power. First, meet with the families. Second, apologize for the mess and offer money. Third, silence the critics. Step 1, meet the families. President Putin arrived at Northern Fleet headquarters in Severomorsk at 1 p.m., where he was greeted by Navy Chief Admiral Vladimir Kuryedov, Northern Fleet Commander Admiral Vyacheslav Popov, and other senior naval officials. At 4 p.m. in Vijayeva, the families gathered in the Officers' Club to meet the president. He was already 2 hours behind schedule. Putin arrived on the base 4 hours late with a large entourage. He first visited the Kursk commander's widow, Irina Lichena, at her home in one of the decaying apartment buildings that littered the town. Putin then walked over to the Officers' Club. A little over an hour after arriving on the base and 5 hours behind schedule, Putin faced the 500-plus family members waiting for their chance to confront the president. Of the 118 crew members, more than half were married, 65 children had lost their fathers, and 4 wives were pregnant. The hall was packed with sad and angry people, and the mood was tense. Cameras filmed the meeting, but journalists were banned from the building. Putin began. It is impossible to believe it is all over. The grief is immeasurable. There are not enough words of comfort. My heart is hurt, but yours are hurting much more. Words of condolence and apologies have been offered to you, and I add my voice to that. The people in the hall started hurling questions at him. Why hadn't he asked for foreign help right away? He explained. At 7 o'clock Sunday morning, Defense Minister Marshal Sergeyev had told him that the Northern Fleet had everything they needed to rescue the men. What? He didn't find out about the disaster until nearly a day after the fact? Well, the sub was not considered lost until 11 at night, and she wasn't found until 4:30 in the morning. The crowd got angry. Wait, I must finish my answer. Foreign assistance was suggested on the 15th, and Admiral Kuryedov agreed to it. Well, that was a load of bull. The families had heard on TV that the admirals had delayed accepting help from Western rescuers. Putin shouted, "The television tells lies! It lies! It lies! It lies!" The meeting threatened to devolve into chaos. Putin could barely hear what anyone was shouting. It was time for step 2 of the 3-step program to reassert power, accept responsibility, and offer compensation. Putin latched onto a comment of a woman who worried that she had no more money. The president had decided to pay the widows their husbands' salaries for the next 10 years. But the crowd wasn't having it. When they asked Putin to tell them what an officer's salary was, he guessed wrong, inciting more rage. Putin threw his note down on the table. He promised the wives new houses anywhere in Moscow or St. Petersburg, and yes, the civilian torpedoes engineer's family would also receive compensation. And yes, the girlfriends of the crew members would also be looked after. One man shouted, "So my son has died for the cost of an apartment." Putin shot back, "I am ready to answer for anything that has happened over the last 100 days since I've been president. As for the past 15 years, I will sit down with those responsible and put your questions to them. I want answers as well." The angry debate in the hall went on for hours, moving from topic to topic. The people in this room were not easily impressed by the words of their president. They were family members of elite submariners. Then the question of salvaging the submarine and the recovery of the bodies of the sailors came up. When will we get them back, dead or alive? Answer, as the president. Putin would tell them the moment he himself knew the answer. He promised on his word of honor that they would do their best to raise the Kursk. But why had he only arrived in the north now? Why had the president not ended his vacation? Why had it taken him 10 days to travel to the Northern Fleet to see the situation for himself? This was a tough one. Putin said, "From the very beginning, I had to decide whether I should fly up here or not. I asked military officials, can I help here? They firmly told me no. Even the talk alone of you coming will raise people's concern. All operations would stop for several days. Do you know how many people would go with me? How many aides and officials?" A woman in the front row stood up and shouted, "You should put the officials in jail. They deceived you, Mr. President." Some of Putin's bodyguards closed in on the woman, forcing her to sit down again, but the president shouted at them, "Don't make her sit down, let her speak. You can get up, speak your mind." Everyone in the hall shouted their support. "She is right, we've all been deceived." Putin tried to defend the fleet admirals. "We cannot say they deceived us. They told us the truth, that the rescue facilities were available, but the systems failed to operate." An old sailor stood up and said that they knew the search and rescue facilities had been in ruins for decades. If these officials had said that they had everything they needed, they had deceived the president, and for that they ought to be stripped of their ranks and honors. Putin firmly denied this. The admirals acted according to the regulations. Once they knew the equipment didn't work, they asked for help. But it took them 8 days to figure out their equipment failed? Did the admirals not know they were failing, or did they lie? The foreigners came and did it in 8 hours. And by the way, how did they do it? Putin said, "They didn't try to dock. They worked manually in a simple way using the methods of our grandparents. They made a wrench. Oh God, and we couldn't even do that?" But the crowd settled down. People were too tired to be angry anymore. No rescue ships were coming back with loved ones. Everyone was dead. A man stood up and thanked the president for coming. A woman said, "I'm also thankful, but I want to ask you to apologize to the widows and the mothers." Putin said, "I think that's how we began our talk at the very beginning. I started with an apology." Putin had won them over. Step 2 of the plan was complete. Some people thought this was the president's baptism by fire. However, this was not Putin's first rodeo. At the time of the fall of the Berlin Wall, he was a KGB officer in Dresden, East Germany. A furious crowd showed up at the local KGB headquarters to vent their anger about Stasi agents. The Russian team didn't have more than 5 guns between them, and the KGB in Moscow refused to send military assistance to save its East German station. While everyone in the office frantically burned decades' worth of records, the mob threatened to storm the building. Putin went outside and bluffed for an hour about how they were not KGB agents, they were tradesmen. Eventually the crowd dispersed. Putin's stalling had gained them some extra time, and it made his career. How was this any different? When Putin departed, the official line was that he left because there would be no ceremonies. Correspondents said that he was shocked by the hostile reception that he received from the 500 relatives of the Kursk crew. On Thursday, family members did attend a private formal memorial service in Vijayeva. During this ceremony, they broke ground for a monument to the Kursk and her lost crew. Some relatives participated in shipboard rites at the disaster site and lowered wreaths into the sea. On the official day of mourning, Wednesday, August 23, 2000, flags were half-mast across Russia, but Putin asked the TV stations not to show any ceremonies at the request of the families. He had also asked them not to run entertainment shows, but regular programming continued during the morning, including soap operas. Time for step 3 of the 3-step plan to regain control: handle the critical media. To do that, Putin had to destroy the oligarchs who owned the TV stations and newspapers that had made him look bad. Putin did an interview with state-controlled RTR-TV. He said, "I feel a complete sense of responsibility and guilt for the tragedy. The tragedy should unite the nation and the people." He wanted to revive the army, the navy, and the country. Putin knew Russia wouldn't be a superpower yet, but she would be a great power, and naval might is Russia's power. Apart from the compensation for the Kursk family members, he promised pay raises for all military personnel. Because of taxes, a bit of an empty gesture, and he promised to build 4 new rescue centers. Defense Minister Igor Sujaev, Naval Commander Vladimir Kuryedov, and Northern Fleet Commander Vyacheslav Popov had sent Putin letters of resignation. But he thought that accepting them was the easy way out. They first needed to find out what went wrong and who was really to blame. Putin then went in for the kill. He accused the media of lying and discrediting the country. The so-called free and independent media had done more harm than good in fanning the Russian fury against the government's handling of the tragedy. The media owners, the oligarchs, were trying to exploit this misfortune for their own political gain. Sure, the oligarchs had helped stricken families, providing them with transportation and making donations, but these same oligarchs had lined their pockets with Russia's state assets and caused the country's economic crisis. They were responsible for the destruction of the armed forces, and if anyone should be blamed, it should be these hypocrites. On Thursday, Putin launched an unrestricted investigation into the sinking of the Kursk to create a buffer against his critics. Russia's top prosecutor, Vladimir Ustinov, started a criminal investigation under Article 263 of the Criminal Code of the Russian Federation, violations of the rules for traffic safety, operation of railway, air, or water transportation systems. Ustinov would find out whether an unknown party had interfered with a Russian military exercise and what had really happened. Putin's government vowed to tell even the most inconvenient truths regarding the Kursk, no matter what. The investigation also meant that the Kursk crew would be treated as suspects. At the end of August, Deputy Prime Minister Klebanov, in charge of a commission of inquiry to find out what had happened to the Kursk, was desperate to say something positive about the tragedy. He said a joint operation with the Norwegians to recover the bodies of the Kursk sailors could begin as early as September. This was news to Salt offshore officials who were still in negotiations with the Russians, and they didn't expect their divers to work in the Arctic waters of the Barents Sea until next summer. But that was when the Russians planned to raise the submarine herself. The family members wondered why they couldn't wait until after the Kursk was raised to find the bodies. In an open letter to Putin, 78 relatives of the deceased Kursk crew asked that any recovery effort be postponed and to not risk more lives by hurrying. They wrote, "Let the hull of the submarine become a temporary military cemetery, which is a centuries-old respected sailor's tradition, until preparations have been made for raising the vessel with all the crew." With the rescue efforts over, people started looking for someone to blame for the sinking of the Kursk. Russia's defense minister Igor Sergeyev continued spouting the official party line on TV, continuing his crusade against the Americans. The Kursk had been struck by a foreign American submarine. A Russian submersible had located the conning tower of this sub, and of course there were those mysteriously disappearing foreign buoys seen near the Kursk. Apparently, he hadn't gotten the memo that one of those buoys was a sack of potatoes and the other had probably been a jellyfish. Because buoys do one thing and one thing only: float. They don't sink. And if the buoy was still attached to a sub limping away, the line would have simply broken. Another theory emerged late August when a fire took out a state-controlled television station and Chechen rebels claimed responsibility. They also took credit for the Kursk disaster. Here it was. The Kursk was sunk by sabotage of pro-Chechen rebels from Dagestan. One of the torpedo experts aboard the Kursk was from Dagestan. Case closed. The Kremlin denied it, but the theory helped push Putin's message that Russia needed a strong military force to defend themselves against the ruthless enemies of Russia. Moscow told the Russian Federal Security Service, the FSB, to investigate the sabotage rumors. Deputy Prime Minister Klebanov and his official government commission investigating the disaster announced what they believed had caused the sinking. Again, it had been a powerful dynamic external impact corresponding to the first event. That first event was probably a collision with a foreign American submarine, a large surface ship, or a World War II mine. The summer war games had been monitored by two American Los Angeles-class submarines, the USS Memphis and the USS Toledo, and the Royal Navy Swiftsure-class submarine HMS Splendid. When the exercise was cancelled due to the accident, these ships put in at European ports. The Memphis was obviously damaged. Here, check out this undated and unverified fuzzy satellite photo. The friendly missile theory came back around. According to the German Berliner Zeitung, the FSB had handed President Putin a confidential report. A missile launched from the Peter the Great hit the Kursk. There had been an error in the warhead or a failure in the friend or foe identifier. The moment the missile theory was denied by Klebanov and Sergeyev, conspiracy theorists picked it up and ran with it. The missile theory would be a real embarrassment for the fleet, and it would explain why the admirals doubled down on the collision theory despite lack of evidence. No evidence of the conning tower wreckage was produced, and no one talked about it again. Now, an unnamed Defense Ministry official told the Itartas news service that parts of a metal railing had been recovered from the Kursk site. It could have come from the top of a foreign sub during a collision. Early September, Klebanov announced one of the initial findings of his investigatory panel. The preliminary analysis strongly suggested that all 118 sailors aboard the Kursk had died quickly after it sank. He said, almost certainly, once it was on the sea floor, no one was left alive. They never sent any signals from the distressed sub after it went down. The messages had come from a mechanical device on board that went off automatically. The Americans would indeed back him up about the lack of knocking. Their subs had heard nothing, and they had superior listening devices that could distinguish the various sounds of the ocean more precisely. But that's classified, naturally. Putin wouldn't touch the collision theory with a 10-foot pole. Western observers thought this was because Putin knew it was a lie that the armed forces pushed to deflect their own incompetence and responsibility. Putin had a hard time trusting the admirals as was. But collision conspiracy theorists believe that Putin didn't talk about it because of his phone call that he had had with US President Bill Clinton. That's when Clinton had confessed that a US sub had collided with the Kursk and he had wanted to make amends. So the American president had either stopped the Star Wars missile defense program or had canceled billions of dollars of Russian debt. As part of this secret deal, Putin would cover up any evidence of a collision. And that's why it never surfaced. Meanwhile, Putin met with Clinton in person. We felt impotent during this whole disaster, the Russian president told the American president. He had not been allowed to tell the relatives, but there was a huge hole blown in the Kursk's hull. It had flooded the first 3 compartments of the sub instantly. He believed that the entire crew died in 60 to 90 seconds. Putin confided with Clinton that he had no idea how they could ever get the bodies out of there, or if there were even more than bones left to recover because of the cod living in the area. Washington went to exceptional and unprecedented lengths to prove that no US submarine was involved in the loss of the Kursk. In New York, President Clinton's national security advisor, Sandy Berger, met with the head of Russia's Security Council, Sergei Ivanov. Over the strong objections of US Navy intelligence services, Berger handed Ivanov edited audio tapes with the acoustic and seismographic data from the USS Memphis. The recordings would prove to Moscow that the Northern Fleet was wrong to keep saying there had been a collision. The data confirmed that the explosions were caused by an internal weapons accident. Ivanov was humiliated and angry. He said that he and Putin both believed the collision theory the military was pushing was false. Had they known the truth from the beginning, the Kremlin would have responded differently. And the Americans were like, would they have though? The duo returned to Russia. Neither the president nor Ivanov put a stop to the collision claims, which were now spiraling out of control. The claims were politically convenient, and Putin approved investigations into them. Perhaps he didn't want the collision conspiracy theorists to think that the Russian president was pro-American and had been bought. The Russian Navy really needed to know what had really happened to the downed submarine, quickly. The Kursk disaster had lowered submariners' morale, who now refused to do extended undersea missions, and leaving expensive 949A Antioch-class submarines docked pending the investigation wasted defense capabilities. In public, they continued supporting the collision theory, but privately, they had to find out what had actually happened. Was it an explosion from a defective torpedo? That meant they would have to change the way the weapons were handled and stored. Was it sabotage? That meant they would have to vet their crews better. Was it defective hardware or software? That meant they'd have to update the systems on all the subs immediately. Or was it something else? Using the recovery of the bodies as a cover, they formulated 4 different classified missions. First, they had to check the condition of the twin nuclear reactors. Second, they had to recover the encoding devices, books, manuals for operating the boat's systems and weaponry, and the ship's log. Sure, the codes had been changed in the hours directly after the Kursk disaster. However, the old codes were still useful to foreigners who could use them to decipher old transmissions. This would give them valuable insights into Russian plans and preparedness. Third, they would hunt for any evidence, no matter how slight, to support the collision theory. Fourth, the Navy wanted to know what caused the explosions. Once they had that information, they could use it to restore morale among the submariners and get the Kursk sister boats back out to sea. Meanwhile, the Northern Fleet kept watch over the wreck site. The nuclear-powered battlecruiser Peter the Great shelled the area with bombs and hand grenades on a irregular basis. They wanted no one near the wreck and steal Kursk secrets or disturb the crime scene. All the while, they kept sampling the waters for radioactivity. If the Russians wanted any chance of recovering the bodies, they had to cut open the Kursk at different places in the double hull. They couldn't use the watertight doors to go from compartment to compartment. As the Seaway Eagle's footage had revealed, debris inside was thrown all over the place. The outer rubberized hull and the inner pressure hull were separated by 7 feet. The divers could cut one hole in the outer hull and several portals in the inner pressure hull. The divers could swim in the space between the hulls to get into 2 adjoining compartments. Rubin's Central Design Bureau for Marine Engineering would figure out where the cuts in the hull had to be made. They had designed the Kursk and knew the layout. Rubin designers created full-size templates to be placed on the hull so the divers knew precisely where to cut to avoid bulkheads, support beams, and other structures. The Russians weren't gonna bungle this thing and asked for foreign expertise. However, foreign divers could never ever enter the Kursk. They had to scour Russia for specialist divers who were willing to work inside the flooded, pitch-black and corpse-filled submarine. The divers should be men who knew about nuclear reactor design, damage evaluation, and explosions, but they didn't exist. It was easier for a diver to become somewhat of an expert in these fields than for an expert to learn saturation diving. The experts could assist the divers via live video and audio feeds. They chose one diver from the Baltic Sea Fleet and another from the Black Sea Fleet. The 10 others were picked from 2 secretive naval organizations that operated near St. Petersburg. The elite team was flown to Northern Fleet headquarters at Severomorsk, where they studied the Kursk, analyzed construction diagrams, and memorized the layout of the submarine. They visited the Kursk sister sub, the Ariol, to familiarize themselves with the inside of the Kursk. They moved around the sub wearing blindfolds to feel their way around passageways, hatches, and ladders. The divers practiced taking alternative routes to the captain's personal safe so they could retrieve the codebooks and other secret documents kept there. The Ariol's officers advised the team on where the Kursk sailors might have taken cover after the explosions. The Russian divers went to the Military Medical Academy in St. Petersburg next. They needed basic forensic skills and prepare themselves emotionally and psychologically to handle the dead bodies. They toured the morgues to study men who had perished in fires, in car crashes, and from drowning. They also studied bodies in advanced states of decomposition. Rubin was acting as a government advisor on negotiations with Stolt Offshore. Since Stolt divers had been the ones who originally worked on the Kursk, they were the first choice. But the talks had stalled. The Norwegian division of Stolt Offshore was asking $12 million to perform the recovery work. Rubin estimated the job would cost $9 million. Perhaps the Norwegians hiked the price because the Russians hadn't played nicely the first time around. Klebanov ordered Rubin to make a deal as quickly as possible and sent them a list of 8 firms capable of handling the complicated job. Rubin opened negotiations with all of them. 40 days after the Kursk sank on September 20th, morning services were held all over Russia. According to Russian Orthodox doctrine, on the 40th day, the soul of a departed person left the body and ascended to heaven. On this 40th day, protesters also gathered outside the U.S. Embassy in Moscow to demand an investigation into whether or not a U.S. sub had rammed the Kursk. The United States kept denying that any of their subs had been involved in the accident. None of their submarines were damaged in any way. But every inch of the seafloor would be examined by the sonar from the research vessel Akademik Mieczyslaw Kieldyś and her 2 Mir submersibles. They had returned from showing rich foreign tourists the Titanic wreck site. Incidentally, the Kieldyś and the Mirs had led 3 expeditions of the American movie director James Cameron to the Titanic and the Bismarck. And the Kieldyś was used in the present-day scenes of his 1997 movie, Titanic. At the end of September, the Kieldyś and the 2 Mir submersibles studied a 3-mile area around the Kursk's remains. They were looking for the foreign sub's railing. They collected several metal fragments, but they were all part of the Kursk's inner and outer hulls. Damage of these samples showed a tremendous explosion originating in the Kursk torpedo room. After 95 hours of searching the bottom, they had found no evidence to indicate that there had been a collision with another vessel. 2 weeks later, Klebanov formally announced that the Mir seafloor search had found zilch. Experts now concluded that a collision with another submarine was not the most likely cause of the disaster. The findings were quietly announced, but no one cared. Russian nationalists and Russian admirals stuck to the American aggression story and refused to let the collision theory die. Klebanov said that the cause of the submarine's disaster would be named on November 8th. But November 8th came and went, and no one said anything. The Mir's mission hadn't stopped Kuryedov from speculating, though. The admiral mentioned to the press that he had facts, but no evidence to support the version that the Kursk was sunk by a foreign American submarine. The Mir submersibles had, in fact, discovered debris from a U.S. sub, but this proof had been suppressed under the supposed agreement between President Clinton and Putin, so no one would ever see it. People came up with elaborate and far-fetched theories about how a foreign American submarine could have crashed the Kursk, sank it, left the scene in more or less one piece, and left nothing behind. So, a Los Angeles-class sub, only a third the size of the Kursk, sank an unsinkable submarine and remained undamaged. A deal to recover the bodies of the Kursk crew was made with Halliburton AS, a Norwegian subsidiary of the American Energy Services Company, early October. They agreed to supply divers and equipment to enter the Kursk for $7 million. The company's low bid would be offset by the high profile of the operation. Halliburton owned the Norwegian diving platform Regalia, a vessel especially designed for diving and working operations in the oil fields in the North Sea. The Regalia had 2 diving bells, and the platform could house 18 saturation divers in 3 pressure chambers. The team of world-class divers consisted of an American, a South African, a Norwegian, and 9 British divers. 6 Russian divers joined them in bargain. During the journey to the wreck site, they and the Halliburton crew had some time for test diving, training routines, and checking equipment. In the meantime, several Western companies were discussing plans to lift the Kursk. The salvage operation was expected to take place a year from now. While the divers were underway, officials still asked the Kremlin to reverse its decision to recover the bodies this way. The discussion lasted until the team arrived on October 20th. After picking up special equipment, such as a unique abrasive water jet cutting system, the Regalia approached the Kursk accident site on Friday. Relatives of the lost submariners, civilian dignitaries, and naval officers came on board. A brief memorial service was held to honor the dead. 2 ROVs were sent down to film the damage. The bow was reduced to a mass of wreckage and metal debris. Sections of the first compartment were scattered over a large area, and a large part of the second compartment was also severely damaged. There were 2 large cracks running front to back, stopping a few feet in front of the conning tower on the starboard side. The ROVs marked all sorts of wreckage with coordinates and picked up the most interesting parts. like several torpedo fragments. The first divers went down to the Kursk that night. Between the outer and inner hulls, pressure tubes ran from the storage tank to the water ballast compartment. The divers first had to cut these, so the remaining air could blow out of the pipe into the sea with a force so powerful it could cut your leg off like a Star Wars lightsaber. After 4 hours, the first diving team's shift was over. By the end of the second shift, the divers had completed venting the air ballast system, and they got started on making the first porthole into the submarine. At 5 a.m. on Sunday, the divers used the Rubin templates to figure out where to cut a hole above the 8th compartment, but the operation hit a snag. The 4-inch thick rubber coating of the Kursk proved impossible to remove by hand. They had to use the Regalia's crane to rip the rubber off. The divers first made a small hole to check for radiation. The space between the two hulls contained various pipelines and equipment that had to be cleared away before they could begin cutting into the pressure hull. Once it was cleared, they made the hole bigger and started to work on the hole of the inner hull. It took 16 hours. They first cut out a small section to depressurize the interior and to take a water sample. Then, at 7:15 p.m., an emergency call went down to the men at the bottom. They had to come up. The operation had to be interrupted due to a storm front moving in. The storm would make it difficult for the Regalia to stay in a fixed position. That night, the Norwegian divers decided to continue the work despite the strong winds, but they couldn't get anything done. The gusts were so powerful that they actually managed to move the Regalia from her stationary position. That was very dangerous since any movement could yank the divers around like puppets. It could also snap their lifelines like a twig. The next morning, they tried again, but an hour later, the divers had no choice but to return to their decompression chamber. Meanwhile, up top, it was time for a staged photo op. Kuryedov had flown to the site with 2 Kursk widows, who brought homemade pies for the Regalia crew. They cast flowers into the water. Kuryedov's real reason for visiting was to check whether the search for bodies risked the divers' lives. He would cancel the operation if that was the case. Of course, body retrieval was not the only mission, and Kuryedov did not stop the project. But, he reiterated, I am 80% sure that it was a collision with another American submarine. In the next 2 months, I will make up the other 20% and announce to the world who it was. He didn't. Late that night, they went back and enlarged the hole of the inner hull of the 8th compartment. They were behind schedule, and then they hit a bulkhead. The Rubin design engineers had projected the templates on a sister boat of the Kursk. It turned out that not all the giant subs were built with the exact same dimensions. The divers now had to cut through a thick beam. The hole into the 8th compartment was finished just before midnight. The edges were smooth and lined with rubber. Only 1 diver could be inside at a time because if 2 people moved inside the sub, they risked getting their lines entangled. The second Russian waited on the outer casing and kept a close eye on the lifeline of the diver inside. A Western diver remained inside the diving bell, ready to come to the rescue if a diver was in danger. At 3 p.m. on Wednesday, the first person to enter the Kursk after the accident was Warrant Officer Sergei Shmygin. Captain Andrei Svegintsev kept watch at the outer hull. A helmet-mounted video camera sent pictures back up to the Regalia. The visibility was good in the 8th compartment, and there was no sign of a fire. Shmygin investigated 16 feet in the direction of the bow of the submarine. He didn't find bodies, but he couldn't move into the 7th compartment because the passage was too narrow. Shmygin turned around and headed aft. The hatch to the lower decks of the 8th compartment was locked and he couldn't open it. He opened a bulkhead hatch that connected the 8th and the 9th compartment. The 9th compartment couldn't be entered through the escape hatch, but it was open to send in a camera and lights to help the divers search. Visibility in the 9th compartment was terrible because of the dust and ashes in the water. Shmygin unsealed a hatch in the gas-proof section of the floor where he had been told crew members could hide in case of a fire, but found no one inside. The diver moved through a hatch to the lower deck of the 8th compartment where the turbine control post was located. At the very limit of his cord, Shmygin was only able to explore a small area. He then headed for the watertight door leading into the 9th compartment. The diving director aboard the Regalia instructed him to steer clear of a large fish that appeared to guard the door on the other side. When it slowly drifted away, Shmygin went ahead and opened the door, but it was locked. He used his diving knife to move the door's latch and then easily kicked the door open with his foot. The door swung open and Shmygin's helmet captured the fish. It was a mattress slowly drifting inside the compartment's murky water. He used a metal rod to move it aside. On the first floor, the diver did not find any casualties. However, it was difficult to go very far from the hole. The walkway was too narrow and he could barely see anything. Going down the ladder to the next floor, Shmygin found the first casualty, suspended in a cloud of churning rubble. The body had zero buoyancy caused by the many days under pressure. This made it easy to move the bodies out of the Kursk. Very carefully, Shmygin attached a cable and he and Svegintsov slowly extracted the crew member, feet first, through the outer hull. Shmygin moved deeper into the 9th compartment, while Svegintsov gently placed the submariner's body into a yellow steel wire box resting on top of the Kursk. Minutes later, the diver maneuvered a badly burned body of a large man out of the boat. A third body was difficult to get to. Shmygin worried that the compartment's jagged obstacles might break his cable, and he went up, leaving a fourth body trapped behind debris. During the night shift, the divers took hours to recover the 2 casualties Shmygin had left behind. At 1 a.m., the mesh steel sleigh, containing the first 4 bodies, emerged from the depth of the sea and swung into a fenced area at one corner of the Regalia. Each body was placed in a sealable unit that would be airlifted to the Naval Hospital in Severomorsk. The Laboratory of Judicial and Medical Examination would perform autopsies and other tests on the remains. Because of the bad weather, the bodies couldn't be airlifted out. But there were qualified Russian forensic specialists in Regalia's company, and they performed the initial exams on the bodies in a chilled room on the platform. There was no need for secrecy in the infirmary, so standard military practice was followed and everything was filmed, so there was a record. The Russian Navy pathologist was Colonel Lieutenant Sergei Chernyshov, who directed pathologist Shami Shamkhutinov's exam. They immediately noticed something they didn't expect to see. These crewmen not only wore their standard blue work overalls, but also emergency suits of thick green insulation fabric to ward off hypothermia. They had had time to put these clothes on. They had not died in 90 seconds, as top officials had claimed all this time. The first body was partially burnt around the head and chest and covered in oil and soot. The second crewman's upper body was severely burned, but the lower body was in remarkably good condition. When the pathologist peeled away layers of the blackened overalls, he found a package the size of a man's wallet stuffed inside the breast pocket. It was covered in oil, in a black-stained, waterproof wrapping. Shamkhutinov said, "The front surface is solid. I am now removing it from the clothing. Everything is saturated. I am not opening it. I'm afraid to break it into pieces." Chernyshov told Shamkhutinov to open it anyway. Very carefully, the pathologist took the note out of the wrapping. It was a folded page from a logbook. The edges were charred, the paper was damp and stained with oil, but the writing on it was still legible. The camera captured the name at the bottom of the note. Kolesnikov. The body on the pathologist's table was that of Captain Lieutenant Dmitry Kolesnikov, commander of the Kursk's 7th compartment. The note read, "It is 1:15 p.m. All personnel from sections 6, 7, and 8 have moved to section 9. There are 23 of us. We have made the decision because none of us can escape." He listed the names of all 23 survivors by compartment and rank. There were check marks behind each name. Kolesnikov had patiently taken a roll call. He noted the end time, 1:58 p.m. The pathologist gently turned the note over. At the top were 5 lines written to Kolesnikov's wife. "Alichka, I love you. Don't suffer too much. My regards to Gevea and regards to mine. Mitya." The last lines were scrawled in poor handwriting. 3:15 p.m. "It's dark to write here, but I'll try by feel. It looks like there are no chances. 10-20%. Let's hope that at least someone will read this. Here is the list of personnel from the other sections who are now in the 9th and will attempt to get out. Regards to everybody. No need to despair. Kolesnikov." This was undeniable proof that sailors had survived the initial explosions for at least 4 hours. Rescue Chief Rear Admiral Gennady Virich, supervising the recovery efforts aboard the Regalia, was very disturbed by Kolesnikov's note. There was no way he could keep this from his superiors, nor the world. By now, too many people had seen the letter. It would be impossible to deny that it existed. Today, some cynics believe that if the note had been discovered in the naval hospital, it would have just disappeared. At 8:30 a.m. Thursday morning, Virich told the Chief of Staff of the Northern Fleet, Vice Admiral Mikhail Matsak, of the note and its contents. Matsak had been saying all along that he had heard tapping until Monday morning, August 14th. The crew might have been alive even beyond that time. Matsak stopped by Kuryedov's office. They agree that this note, or at least part of it, had to be made public to prove that no one was concealing anything. Next, Deputy Prime Minister Klebanov signed off on it, probably at Putin's request. But all further work on the remains of the Kursk submariners was going to be done behind closed doors from now on. Later, examiners discovered that the bodies were covered in the lubricant used only on the propeller shafts. It proved that the compartment had flooded slowly for several days, gradually increasing the pressure inside the closed space. A note written by another commander was found later, confirming this. But the Navy had learned from their mistake, and its existence was kept from the public for quite a while. Cause of death of all the men eventually recovered from the 9th compartment? Carbon monoxide poisoning. They had not died from hypothermia, nor from too much carbon dioxide, nor from the rising pressure. They had died from the effects of a fire. Half an hour before the official announcement, the Navy got a hold of the Kolesnikov family, and they were told about the note. Matsak revealed the note's existence on TV at 2 p.m. Out of respect for the families, he would not reveal the personal message to Kolesnikov's wife, nor the list with the 22 other names, only the service one. Because only part of the letter was read out, people believed there was a cover-up. Kolesnikov's father, for instance, thought that his son was more disciplined than sentimental, and would have written more about what had happened. Dmitri's wife, Olga, told the press that she had felt that her husband hadn't died immediately, and to hear it confirmed was very painful. All she wanted to do now was read the note. 2 copies were made. One for Northern Fleet Chief Admiral Popov, the second for Olga. The original letter was given to investigators from the Military Prosecutor's Office. The note was classified as top secret. At the wreck site, the discovery of the note changed the recovery plans. They stopped cutting into the 7th compartment and planned to make 2 holes in the 9th compartment so the divers had a better access to retrieve more casualties. But they first had to find out from Rubin where to cut the holes. Meanwhile, work continued in the 9th. Though the mud was cleared out, visibility only improved slightly. The divers had to feel their way around, but they knew there had to be more bodies in this area and were determined to find them. The Russians worked out a search system and found body after body. By Sunday, they had recovered 10. Meanwhile, on Sunday, a Navy memorial ceremony was held at Courage Square in Severomorsk to honor the first recovered bodies of the Kursk submariners. The Russians decided to hold off on cutting more holes in the 9th compartment to not disturb the divers' work inside. They started cutting into the 3rd compartment through the conning tower. 24 people worked in this compartment, and crew members from the 4th and 5th compartment could have moved to the 3rd on their way to the escape pod, or used the shaft to the coral radio system to seek shelter. This 3rd compartment also contained the hydroacoustic and coding equipment and the coveted secret communication codes. From here, the divers could also access the 2nd compartment, the sub-central command post, where 36 crew members were stationed. They were probably near the hatch of the escape pod. In the 9th compartment, the divers found 2 more casualties, bringing the total to 12. But now they needed a better access point. On Monday morning, the Russians discovered the new holes they wanted to cut into compartment 9 would not give them the access they needed. They sent in cameras to see what more could be done. The footage revealed so much destruction that it would be impossible for the divers to continue to work in here. The recovery operation in the 9th compartment was over. The hole in the 8th compartment was sealed up. 2 days later, on Wednesday, they completed the cut in the conning tower to get to compartment 3. A large piece from the outer hull with pipes and a ladder still attached was brought up to the regalia. The cut in the inner hull of the 3rd compartment was finished a few hours later, and the piece was brought up to the surface. Inspection of this section revealed that a fire had raged in that compartment. Next, they cleared out the mud and sent in cameras to evaluate the situation inside. Cables, ashes, and debris were strewn all over the place. The dividing walls, the bulkheads, were pretty much gone. Shards of broken, melted metal stood where the partitions once used to be, and the divers couldn't risk getting near that. The 2nd compartment had clearly been destroyed by a powerful explosion. Objects from the 2nd and 3rd compartments were all tangled up together. The chances of finding intact bodies here were close to zero. Kuryatov ordered to stop the operation in the 3rd compartment, and they sealed up the hole. They moved on to the 4th compartment, but bad weather once again delayed the cutting work. The Navy denies this, but Russian divers appear to have entered the 3rd compartment to retrieve whatever immensely valuable intelligence materials they could find. Some even said 1 or more divers entered the submarine through the gaping hole in the forward hull. It's highly unlikely anyone would have dared to have risked this, though. That night, after clearing debris between the hulls, the divers started cutting the inner hull of the 4th compartment. It was one of the largest areas on the submarine, housing the sleeping cabins, galley, gym, swimming pool, and sauna. 12 men would have been stationed here during a battle stations drill. Kuryatov said that once the work here was completed, they would move to the 5th compartment that housed the nuclear reactors. The recovery mission in the Barents Sea was running out of time. The divers agreed to extend their work shifts from 4 to 6 hours. As more bodies were being identified, the body of Kolesnikov was the first to be buried in the Hero's Way in the center of the Serafimovskaya Cemetery early November. More than 3,000 people, friends, colleagues, officials, and dignitaries attended. Kuryatov once again said that he was certain that the Kursk disaster was caused by a collision with a foreign American submarine. The leadership of the Navy refused to comment on any other theories. Meanwhile, at the wreck site, the divers finished cutting into the hull of compartment 4 on Saturday. There were no signs of a fire, and the visibility inside the compartment was quite good. A team of Russian divers made close-up video images of the mutilated area toward the bow, and picked up some debris. They searched the sea floor for evidence of a collision. They found nothing. At night, a Russian diver managed to enter the 4th compartment. It was clear from the destruction that the explosion shockwave had also hit this compartment. All partitions of the service and living areas were gone. But the bulkhead and the watertight door between the fourth and fifth compartment had held. The divers detected no radioactivity. The nuclear reactor's safeguards had worked. The divers saw no bodies in his working area. He wasn't surprised, given the destruction. It became clear that only the crew behind the reactors could have possibly survived any length of time. Now the focus shifted to collecting debris and documents. The divers continued working in the fourth compartment of the Kursk on Monday. They got 6 feet into the compartment, but there were too many sharp objects that could cut their suits. Disappointed by not finding any bodies in the fourth compartment, everyone questioned whether they should continue the operation. Should they try for compartment 5? Bodies might be found on the lower decks. However, the cameras revealed that most of the narrow passageways were blocked. The mission was over, and they sealed up the hull. The operation concluded with a tribute ceremony on the main deck at 2 p.m. Tuesday, November 7th. And with a long salute of her ship's horn, the regalia headed home to Norway. Everything the Navy did in the wake of the Kursk accident seemed to have been intended to sow confusion. According to a CIA report written in December 2000, most Russian officials didn't believe the collision theory, but the leaders wanted to deflect blame. And so, naval officials stuck by the collision theory and passionately denied all others. An American submarine was shadowing the Kursk and had caused the collision by getting too close. Yet no evidence was ever produced, and that satellite photo of the USS Memphis convinced no one. A video of the Kursk released to the public on the 25th of October did show immense damage. Most engineers agreed the dent was no evidence of a foreign submarine scraping the sub. The damage looked like the Kursk had crashed into the sea floor, rocked back and forth, and bent the hull before settling. Worldwide support for the collision theory began to crumble. This whole situation was eerily similar to the Soviet-style cover-up and stonewalling that happened during and after the 1986 Chernobyl disaster. In the new year, the defective torpedo theory started picking up steam. Geophysicists and analysts from Britain's Black Nest Seismic Monitoring Station analyzed the seismic signals and reported its conclusions in February 2001. The seismic waveforms of the second event, accepted by nearly everyone to be several torpedo warheads exploding, had generated the identical high-frequency bubble signature characteristic of an underwater explosion. It was the same signature as the first event, et ergo there had been 2 internal torpedo explosions. Later that month, Klebanov's Commission of Inquiry said that they had discovered that torpedo explosions were responsible for the sinking. Igor Spassky, the director of Rubin, the company that had designed the Kursk, backed this theory, but he may have wanted to deflect blame from any fault in the design of the Kursk. The submarine was supposed to be able to withstand a collision. If it had sunk because of a collision, it would make the company look bad. Someone in the Defense Ministry piled on and revealed that the sub had been refitted to carry new torpedoes that were difficult to store and dangerous to handle. Then an admiral from the Northern Fleet jumped in with this published quote: "One cannot deny the possibility that during firing, the torpedo did not leave the hatch completely and exploded inside it." And then the friendly fire missile theory came back around, but it was now combined with the defective torpedo theory. A retired Russian admiral, supposedly connected with the rescue operation, said in March that documents concerning the Kursk were being hidden. A shipwreck missile launched from the Peter the Great went the wrong way. The missile hit the water near the Kursk with tremendous impact. This in turn caused the Kursk to roll and shudder sufficiently to dislodge a torpedo from its rack. The weapon then leaked its highly volatile fuel and exploded. In June 2001, the Komsomolskaya Pravda tabloid published a report that revealed that senior officers in the Russian Navy had engaged in an elaborate deception to cover up the actual cause of the disaster. The boat's captain, Gennady Lichin, had sent a message to headquarters immediately before the explosion. He had said, "We have a malfunctioning torpedo. Request permission to fire it." This never happened. Navy rules dictate that a captain of a vessel in danger from a defective torpedo needed no permission from anyone to fire it. He had to do two things: ensure that no civilian ships were around and reset the launch system to stop the torpedo's engine before the launch. And no, a submarine doesn't need to be at periscope depth for this. The troublemaker torpedo could be launched at any depth. But there were so many theories swirling around, caused by what the CIA dubbed the vacuum of information. Let's list a few of them and see how they hold up. The first theory. The Kursk collided with the USS Memphis, the USS Toledo, or the HMS Splendid that rammed the boat either by accident or on purpose. But no foreign sub nor parts of these foreign submarines were found on location. No subs sustained any noticeable damage. The Kursk hit a modern or World War II mine. But could a double-hulled vessel be damaged from a mine to such a degree that it set off the other torpedoes? The Kursk collided with an unknown surface ship, but a surface ship's hull is a lot thinner than a submarine's hull, and she would have been at the bottom with her. The Kursk was struck or nearly struck by a friendly or not-so-friendly missile. But that's not what the recorded sounds say. The Kursk was hit by a combat torpedo, a new secret NATO weapon, or an Mk-48 torpedo fired by the USS Memphis, the USS Toledo, or both during the exercises. But when a torpedo moves through the water, it makes a characteristic sound that all the vessels in the area, surface ships and submarines, would have heard. No one had heard anything. An explosion occurred during the testing of one of Russia's newest weapons. For instance, the new super-fast, top-secret Xval torpedo, 5 times faster than a NATO torpedo. But a Xval torpedo is a solid rocket-propelled torpedo and does not have the same tendency to self-detonate, nor were there Xval torpedoes on board. The Kursk was sabotaged by Chechen rebels. Unlikely. The Kursk hit the ground at high speed because of an error in the boat's control system. But at high speed, the Oscar IIs sound like a jumbo jet. This sound was not heard. The Kursk went out of control because the entire crew got ill. They either suffered decompression sickness when it went from a whale jump to an emergency dive, or they suffered from chlorine poisoning, or the oxygen was suddenly lost. But 2 explosions. The crew had gone on strike for unpaid wages and set the Kursk on the seafloor on purpose. Again, 2 explosions. An explosion located in the high-pressure air tanks used to blow the ballast tanks right by the torpedo tubes. Possible. Perhaps her torpedo was stuck in the tube when it went off and it flooded the sub. Could happen. An explosion of a malfunctioning torpedo, batteries, or gas mixture in the first compartment caused an internal fire and subsequent second explosion. Now we're getting somewhere. A UFO was involved. Or the devil. Or God. Alright, that's enough. If anyone really wanted to know what had happened, they needed to raise the Kursk. And they were going to.